Right now, as you read this, 15 canned products are getting axed from Walmart's supply commitments, not phased out slowly over a year. Not maybe. 15 items all at once, with the contract deadlines already locked into the calendar. July 25th is the line in the sand, and most shoppers will not find out until they are standing in an aisle staring at a gap where their go-to product used to sit. I dug through quarterly earnings reports, USDA forecasts, trade policy filings, and supplier contract timelines from the biggest players in the canned food industry. Every single source told the same story from a different angle. What follows is a countdown from the items you will notice missing first to the one that will blindside almost everyone. A brand that has been sitting on American shelves since 1898, getting hammered by a steel tariff that 0% of grocery shoppers have on their radar. We will get to all of them. This countdown runs from the products where you will first notice gaps appearing to the one that will catch you completely flat-footed. And by the time we reach the end, you will know exactly which items to act on and why the July 25th contract deadline is the only date that matters. Let us get into it. Number 15. Canned green beans. Nobody loses sleep over canned green beans. They cost next to nothing, they take up minimal shelf space, and they have been a default side dish in American kitchens for generations. That total lack of drama is exactly why this one sneaks up on people. Here is the deal. The domestic green bean harvest for 2025 came in soft. Processing-grade green bean acreage in Wisconsin and Oregon, the two states that account for the bulk of what ends up in cans, dropped as growers shifted toward crops with better per-acre returns. That acreage reduction feeds directly into what packers can offer retailers for the upcoming contract cycle. Fewer beans in the ground means fewer cans on the truck. On top of that, the Section 232 steel tariffs reinstated at 25% on January 1, 2026, hit low-margin vegetables harder than anything else in the canned aisle. Green beans sell for under $1 a can in many cases. The packaging cost as a percentage of the retail price is enormous compared to something like premium soup or canned meat. When the can itself gets more expensive, the math on a sub-dollar product falls apart fast. Walmart's buyers do not keep products around when the margin math stops working. They consolidate SKUs, drop the lowest performers, and move on. Green beans are quiet, cheap, and utterly expendable from a merchandising standpoint, which makes them first in line for the cut. Open a can of green beans, and what you get is that familiar, soft, slightly metallic vegetable smell that has been a part of American dinner tables for as long as anyone can remember. That ordinariness is the problem. Nobody fights for ordinary. Nobody stockpiles it. Nobody notices when one brand quietly disappears from the shelf and the remaining option costs 15 cents more. Grab a case now. You will not find this variety of options in the fall. Number 14. Canned pumpkin. This one matters more than people think, and the timing is brutal. Canned pumpkin demand spikes every year starting in September and peaking through November. The supply decisions that determine whether those shelves are full happen right now, in June and July. Libby's, which controls a dominant share of the U.S. canned pumpkin market, sources almost exclusively from Illinois. The 2025 growing season was rough. Excess rain during planting, followed by a dry spell during the critical growth window, reduced yields below the 5-year average. Libby's parent company, Nestle, acknowledged supply constraints in its most recent investor update without getting into specifics. But the signals are clear if you know where to look. Pumpkin is a single-harvest, single-source product in a way that almost nothing else in the canned aisle is. There is no secondary supplier waiting in the wings. There is no import alternative that tastes the same. When the domestic harvest comes up short, the shelves get thin, and every retailer, including Walmart, starts rationing allocation to stores. The shelf will look fine in July, it will look fine in August, but by mid-September, when the early holiday bakers start reaching for it, the thinning will already be underway. And once it starts, there is no resupply until the next harvest cycle, which is a full year away. If you bake pies, make pumpkin bread, or use it in soups, buy it now. Not in October when everyone else panics and the shelf is already stripped. Right now, while it is still sitting there being completely ignored. 4 to 6 cans will carry you through the entire holiday season without a second thought. Number 13. Canned wild Alaskan salmon. You have probably walked past this one 100 times without giving it a thought. Silver label, modest price, unremarkable packaging. It just sits there, and you assume it always will. Wrong. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game released its April 2026 forecast, projecting the pink salmon harvest at 56 million fish. That is the worst number in over a decade, and it represents a steep drop from the previous year's run. Pink salmon is not some niche species. It is the foundation of the entire canned salmon industry. When the harvest craters like this, processors do not eat the loss. They slash volume, jack up prices, and the low-margin retail accounts are the first ones to see their SKUs disappear. The Bureau of Labor Statistics already reported seafood prices climbing 3.7% in the first quarter of 2026 compared to the year before. That increase is already baked into the supplier contracts being hammered out right now for the back half of the year. Walmart's buyers have already seen the pack numbers. The decisions being finalized in June and July will dictate what the shelf looks like come September. Pick up 2 or 3 cans while the price still reflects last year's harvest. Wild Alaskan salmon has almost no domestic substitute at a comparable price. When this category contracts, there is nowhere else to go. If any of this is clicking for you, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds and helps more people find this before the window closes. Number 12. Canned chicken. Most people treat canned chicken like a last resort. The thing you dig out of the back of the pantry when the fridge is empty and you cannot be bothered to go out. That perception has kept it cheap for years, and the market is about to correct that misconception hard. The USDA's Livestock, Poultry and Dairy Outlook from March 2026 documented a contraction in broiler production capacity. The cause is a 1-2 punch: feed costs that will not come down and ongoing flock rebuilding from the avian influenza outbreaks that tore through commercial operations across 15 states in 2024 and 2025. Feed corn and soybean meal prices stayed elevated through the first quarter of 2026, and processors have been bleeding margins for a year and a half straight with no relief in sight. Conagra Brands, the company behind Swanson Canned Chicken, said on its February 2026 earnings call that poultry input cost pressure was not expected to ease before the second half of the year. Meanwhile, demand for shelf-stable protein has been running above forecasts since late 2025 as consumer pantry stocking habits shifted. Higher costs plus tighter supply plus stronger demand equals one thing: fewer options on the shelf, followed by higher prices on whatever remains. Canned chicken is the ultimate utility protein. It goes into everything: pasta, salads, soups, wraps, casseroles. That versatility is exactly why it vanishes first when households start restocking. Buy a case now. It will not stay priced as an afterthought for long. Number 11. Canned coconut milk here is one that flies completely under the radar. Canned coconut milk is a staple for anyone who cooks Thai, Indian, or Caribbean food at home, and the sourcing picture is deteriorating fast. The primary suppliers are Thailand, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia. Every single one of those origins is now subject to either increased tariffs under the updated Section 301 schedule or supply-side disruptions from weather events that hammered coconut production in Southeast Asia through 2025. The Philippines dealt with back-to-back typhoons that damaged coconut plantations in the Visayas region, and recovery timelines for coconut palms are measured in years, not months. Importers who were already squeezed on margins are now facing the double hit of reduced supply from origin and higher landed costs from tariffs. Walmart's private label coconut milk, which most shoppers assume is some kind of infinite supply generic, comes from the exact same co-packers and the exact same sourcing regions as the name brands. When the supply tightens, the store brand tightens with it. Pop the top on a can of coconut milk, and you get that thick, sweet, slightly tropical smell that is the backbone of a curry, a smoothie, a dessert, or a dozen other recipes. That smell comes from a palm tree that takes 6 to 8 years to reach full production. You cannot rush a replacement supply the way you can replant a field of beans. When coconut production drops, the recovery timeline is measured in years, not seasons, and the price moves accordingly. If you use coconut milk regularly, stock 6 to 8 cans now. The price and availability both move against you after July 25th. This is one of those categories where the disruption is already locked in, and there is nothing anyone can do to speed up the fix. Number 10. Canned Italian tomatoes here is something that would shock most home cooks if they actually thought about it. The crushed tomatoes, whole peeled tomatoes, and San Marzano varieties lining American grocery shelves overwhelmingly do not come from California. They come from Italy. And Italy's canned tomatoes are now caught inside a tariff structure that has made virtually everything imported from the European Union meaningfully more expensive than it was a year ago. The Section 301 tariffs on EU goods were expanded in January 2026, with the Office of the United States Trade Representative confirming a rate increase on processed tomato products from Italy and other EU member states. That tariff kicked in February 1st. Importers absorbed the first wave through spring. The second wave, the price adjustment hitting retail contracts, is landing right now in the second quarter. Walmart's cost from their importers is materially higher than what the shelf price currently shows, and that gap cannot hold. Walmart has been in drawn-out contract renegotiations with multiple Italian tomato suppliers since the tariff announcement. July 25th marks the expiration of several protected price contract periods. After that, the new math takes over. Domestic alternatives will remain cheaper. But if you want the import varieties, the San Marzanos, the whole peeled DOP tomatoes, the clock is ticking louder than it looks. Stock them before the contract floor drops out. Quick reminder, if this is useful, a like, comment, and subscribe genuinely helps us reach more families who need to hear it. Number 9. Canned sardines and mackerel. Nobody gets excited about canned sardines. Walk through any grocery store and count how many people reach for them versus how many breeze right past. But the people who do buy sardines consistently understand something the rest of the aisle has not figured out yet. And that knowledge gap is about to get very visible. The North Atlantic mackerel and sardine fisheries operate under bilateral agreements between the U.S., Canada, the EU, and Norway. In February 2026, Norway unilaterally jacked up its mackerel quota claim by 18% above what was agreed in the 2025 multilateral framework, citing its own updated stock assessments. The EU and UK filed formal protests in March. For American importers, this translates into serious uncertainty about supply consistency from the main sourcing regions, which means tighter forward buying and reduced product variety on shelves that depend on imports. At the same time, analysis from the American Action Forum, published in March 2026, showed that U.S. seafood tariffs on processed fish from Asian suppliers, the backup sourcing region for sardines, had pushed landed costs up between 22 and 31% year over year, depending on origin country. When both your primary and secondary supply pipelines face cost pressure at the same time, variety gets killed first. The specialty tins, the flavored options, the smoked varieties, the premium oils, gone. Then the basics get repriced upward. Crack open a tin of smoked sardines, and you get that immediate, concentrated blast of salt, smoke, and ocean. It is not a subtle experience, and neither is what is happening behind the scenes to the supply chain that puts that tin in your hand. Walmart's seafood buyer currently has fewer suppliers to work with than at any point in the last 5 years. The specialty products that brought variety and interest to this section are being pulled first, and once they go, the redirected demand from shoppers who used to buy those options piles on to the remaining basics. That compression happens faster than most people expect. Move on the basics now before your choices narrow further. Number 8. Canned evaporated milk. This is the one that makes people do a double take. Canned evaporated milk has been on American shelves in essentially the same form since the 1880s. It costs almost nothing. It is everywhere. The idea that it could become harder to find or meaningfully more expensive feels absurd. It is not absurd. It is math. The USDA's February 2026 dairy products report showed whole milk powder inventories at their lowest point since 2019. Fluid milk production in the top dairy states, California, Wisconsin, Idaho, came in below seasonal expectations in the first quarter due to herd health problems and the lingering effects of the 2025 drought that gutted forage crop yields across the Mountain West. Then, layer on the packaging costs. The Can Manufacturers Institute reported in January 2026 that steel and aluminum can costs remain elevated following the Section 232 tariffs reinstated at 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum effective January 1st. Evaporated milk is a low-price, high can-to-product ratio item. The packaging cost per unit eats a much bigger slice of the total landed cost than it does for something like canned meat or premium soup. When you crack open a can of evaporated milk and tilt it over a pot, it pours thick and pale yellow, nothing like the fluid milk it started as. That richness comes from a specific reduction process, and the product stores for up to 2 years at room temperature. It goes into pumpkin pies, fudge, tres leches cake, mac and cheese, coffee, and a dozen other recipes that call for a creamy concentrated dairy without the refrigeration requirement. That 2-year shelf life is exactly what makes the current window valuable. Grab 4 to 6 cans right now. The price still reflects last year's input costs. By the fourth quarter, it will not. And once the price moves, it tends to stay at the new level for a long time in a category this stable, because there is no competitive pressure forcing it back down. Number 7. Canned chili with beans. Walmart devotes an entire shelf section to canned chili. Hormel, Wolf Brand, store brands, a handful of others. It looks like permanent abundance. It is not. Hormel Foods reported on its first quarter fiscal 2026 earnings call in February that margin compression across its shelf-stable segment was being driven by pork input costs running above prior year levels. The USDA confirmed in January 2026 that the U.S. hog inventory had dropped 1% year over year, continuing a downward slide that has been building since 2023 as producers responded to sustained losses during the prior cost cycle. Pork is the primary protein in most canned chili, and this supply trend is not turning around fast. The bean side is getting hit at the same time. The USDA's March 2026 prospective plantings report showed dry bean acreage in the northern plains, the main domestic growing region, was expected to fall 6% in 2026 compared to the prior year. Farmers are rotating toward commodity crops with better near-term margins. A 6% acreage decline does not cause an overnight shortage, but it creates tightness. And tightness in a category already squeezed on inputs from two directions is exactly what triggers contract renegotiation at the retail level. Pop the lid on a can of chili, and the smell hits immediately. Warm spice, tomato, the richness of slow-cooked pork and beans together. It is one of the most complete single-can meals in the entire grocery store. Protein, fiber, vegetables, and seasoning all in one container. That completeness is exactly what makes it a high-demand pantry item for households looking to stretch a food budget. And high demand in a tightening supply environment is the recipe for price increases. Buy several cans across different brands now before the contract math catches up to the shelf price. The first visible sign will be fewer brand choices. The second sign will be the price on whatever remains. Real quick, like, comment, subscribe. That is all. Back to business. Number 6. Canned corned beef. Canned corned beef has pulled off something remarkable. It exists almost entirely outside the mainstream grocery consciousness. It is not on most weekly shopping lists. It sits at the far end of the canned meat section, picked up by a specific type of buyer who knows exactly what to do with it, and invisible to everyone else. That invisibility has kept the price low and the shelf reliably stocked. That era is ending for documented, verifiable reasons. The primary source country for canned corned beef in the U.S. is Brazil, produced through major processors like JB's and Minerva Foods. In March 2026, the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service expanded residue testing requirements for Brazilian beef imports after a February audit flagged compliance gaps at 3 processing facilities. More testing does not mean the product is dangerous. It means longer processing at the border, reduced throughput per shipment, and higher landed costs per unit for importers already working on razor-thin margins. On top of that, the Section 301 tariff schedule, updated in January 2026, includes processed beef from Brazil in a category subject to additional duties compared to pre-2025 rates. The tariff increase plus the increased border friction is squeezing importer margins from both ends simultaneously. Corned beef from the can has a specific character: salty, slightly gamey, dense with a richness that plant-based alternatives cannot replicate. And it stores for 2 to 5 years at room temperature, making it one of the most durable proteins you can keep in a pantry. Stock it now while the border compliance friction has not fully worked its way into the retail price. The gap between what importers are actually paying and what the shelf tag currently says is closing fast, and when those two numbers meet, the adjustment will not be gradual. It will land all at once at the next contract reset. Number 5. Canned fruit cocktail. Canned fruit cocktail is one of those products that has been so consistently available for so long that people have stopped registering it as something that could ever change. It just exists, cheap and plentiful, somewhere between the canned peaches and the mandarin oranges. The problem is sourcing. A significant portion of the canned fruit cocktail sold in the U.S. uses imported fruit components, particularly pineapple from Thailand and the Philippines, and peaches from China and Greece. Each of those origins is now subject to tariff increases under the expanded Section 301 schedule. Processors who blend domestic and imported fruit to hit a price point are watching their input costs diverge from the retail price Walmart is willing to pay. Del Monte and Dole, the two dominant brands in this category, have both signaled in recent investor communications that shelf-stable fruit margins are under pressure. When margins compress on a low-ticket item, the retailer's response is predictable: fewer varieties, fewer brand options, and eventual price increases on what survives. Open a can of fruit cocktail, and you get that sweet, syrupy smell that is practically a childhood memory in liquid form. It goes into lunchboxes, it gets spooned into bowls as a quick dessert, it shows up at potlucks and in Jell-O molds. It is comfort in a can, and it is about to cost more than it ever has. This is a product families buy for kids, for lunches, for quick sides. If you use it, stock up a dozen cans now. The selection is going to narrow, and the price is going to climb before most people notice anything has shifted. By the time the shelf looks different, the contract that determined the new price was signed weeks earlier in a room you will never see. Number 4. Canned tuna. You already know tuna matters. It is probably sitting in your pantry right now. The question is whether what you have reflects the pricing reality that is building for the second half of 2026, and whether you plan to add more before that reality shows up on the shelf tag. The main sourcing regions for canned tuna sold in the U.S. are Thailand, the Philippines, and Ecuador. Section 301 tariffs on Thai processed seafood were increased effective March 1, 2026, per the USTR's updated schedule released in February. The tariff rate on canned and pouched tuna from Thailand jumped from 5.5% to 12.5%. Thailand is the single largest source of imported canned tuna for American retailers. Regardless of what brand name is on the label, a huge portion of it comes through Thai processing. Simultaneously, skipjack tuna, the species in most mass-market canned tuna, saw reduced catch volumes in the Western Pacific during the first quarter of 2026, according to the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission. Lower catch on the sourcing side, plus higher tariffs on the processing side, is a cost-compounding event. Both forces are pushing the same direction at the same time. Starkist, Bumblebee, Chicken of the Sea, they all source heavily from Thailand. Walmart's store-brand tuna almost certainly comes from the same region through a co-packer. Add 6 to 12 cans to your next order before July 25th. This price is not surviving the third quarter. Take 1 second, like, comment, subscribe. Helps more than you think. Moving on. Number 3. Canned soup. Campbell's Soup is one of the most iconic brands in American grocery history. It has been on shelves in essentially the same format since 1898. It feels permanent. It feels like the one category where disruption simply cannot happen the way it does elsewhere. It is happening right now. Campbell's Soup Company reported on its second quarter fiscal 2026 earnings call in March that the company was dealing with sustained input cost pressure across 3 fronts simultaneously: protein costs, vegetable commodity costs, and steel packaging costs. The Section 232 tariffs on imported steel reinstated at 25% on January 1st directly affect the can manufacturing costs Campbell's absorbs on every single unit it ships. But here is the part most people miss. The Can Manufacturers Institute noted in February 2026 that domestic steel prices also rose in response to the reimposed import tariffs, because domestic producers adjusted their pricing to match the new floor those tariffs created. The cost increase is double-sided. Imported steel costs more, and domestic steel costs more in response to imported steel costing more. Campbell's does not absorb that indefinitely. It passes it through via price increases negotiated at the next contract renewal. Campbell's historically renegotiates its Walmart supply agreement on an 18-month cycle. The current contract period is up for renewal in the third quarter of 2026. The price coming out of that renegotiation will be higher than what you see on the shelf today. Period. Think about a can of chicken noodle soup opened on a cold morning. The steam rising off the pot, the salt and starch smell filling the kitchen, the sound of it being poured out. That experience is so deeply embedded in American domestic life that the price increase when it arrives will feel almost personal. It is not personal. It is a steel tariff, a wheat cost, and a protein input, all landing on the same product at the same time. And the math is not negotiable. Stock 12 to 18 cans across your preferred varieties now. The product stays on the shelf. The price does not stay where it is. And once the new contract price is set, there is no mechanism that brings it back down until the next renewal cycle, which is another 18 months away. Number 2. Canned refried beans. Canned refried beans look like the least vulnerable product on any list you could put together. They are cheap. They are domestic. They are made from a crop that grows across the American Southwest and northern Mexico. You would need a genuine convergence of unusual forces to move the needle on something this basic. Those forces have converged. The 2025 dry bean harvest across the primary growing states, North Dakota, Michigan, Nebraska, Minnesota, came in 14% below the 5-year average per the USDA's November 2025 crop production summary. Drought conditions across the northern plains through July and August of 2025, tracked weekly by the U.S. Drought Monitor, crushed yields in what was already a low acreage planting year. The USDA's March 2026 prospective plantings report showed that producers were not making up those lost acres in 2026, forecasting another below-average dry bean acreage nationally as farmers continued chasing commodity crops with stronger immediate returns. For Mexican-sourced pinto beans, the primary ingredient in most refried bean formulations, the 25% tariff on Mexican agricultural imports effective February 2026 under the expanded Section 301 schedule increased landed costs substantially for importers. Rosarita, Old El Paso, and most other major processors use a blend of domestic and imported pintos. Both supply lines are under pressure at the same time. Refried beans store for 3 years minimum and deliver one of the highest calorie per dollar ratios in the entire canned food section. The price is about to move in a category most shoppers have completely stopped thinking about. Buy a case while contract terms have not yet been renegotiated. By the time you notice the price change at the shelf, it has already happened weeks ago in a contract office. This is not a category with visible warning signs. There is no news coverage, no social media buzz, no industry drama. The beans just quietly cost more one day, and by then your window is gone. The window is narrow, and it closes at July 25th. Number 1. Canned ham. Canned ham looks like a relic from another era, and in some ways it is. But what is about to happen to its price and availability is completely current, completely documented, and completely invisible to the average shopper. That is precisely why it sits at the top of this list. The United States imports a large share of its canned ham from Denmark and Poland, primarily through Tulip Food Company and SoCal, whose products show up under various brand names and private label arrangements across American retail. In January 2026, the expanded Section 232 steel tariff schedule, reinstated at 25%, was confirmed to apply to imported metal containers in addition to raw steel. That directly affects the tin-plated steel cans that European processed ham is shipped in. The tariff hits the container before anyone even considers what is inside it. At the same time, the Section 301 tariff schedule updated in January 2026 included processed pork products from the EU at an effective rate of 20%, up from 12% under the prior schedule. Run those numbers: a 25% metal tariff on the container and a 20% product tariff on the contents. No importer on earth can absorb that combination for long. Walmart's contract with its primary canned ham suppliers is due for renegotiation in the third quarter of 2026. Based on the typical 18-month retail contract cycle in the imported meat category. The USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service reported in February 2026 that European pork processors were already prioritizing Asian and Middle Eastern export markets over U.S. retail because those markets offer more favorable tariff conditions. When your supplier has better options elsewhere, your access to their product at a reasonable price becomes a negotiation you are no longer winning. That is a fundamental shift in leverage for American retailers, and it does not favor them. A European processor staring at a 20% product tariff and a 25% container tariff simultaneously does not quietly accept thinner margins. They reduce export volume to the market, causing the problem, and American retail absorbs the fallout: fewer SKUs, longer resupply gaps, and a price that reflects every layer of that cost architecture stacked on top of itself. Open a can of ham, and what hits you is that dense, slightly smoky smell of cured pork, essentially unchanged since these products were originally developed for military provisioning decades ago. The product itself has not changed. What has changed is every single layer of the cost structure required to move it from a European processing facility to an American retail shelf. This is the item almost nobody on this list sees coming. It sits in the most overlooked corner of the canned meat section, purchased by a small, loyal group of buyers and completely invisible to everyone else. That invisibility is what kept it affordable. Now the tariff math has arrived, and affordability is leaving the building. Stock it now across several brands before the renegotiated contracts go live. This is the one. Last call. Like, comment, and subscribe. 2 seconds of your time helps a lot of families plan ahead.